So let's start with the Jo Cox assassination then. So this happened in June 2016. It was a week before the Brexit vote. Some people have linked it to that. Jo Cox had been an MP for just 1 year, MP in West Yorkshire, a place called Batley. And if you look at her life before she became an MP, she was rubbing shoulders with some big names. Gordon Brown, Sarah Brown, Obama. She was involved with this very dubious White Helmets organization. Her husband also had connections to Gordon Brown. So she was bringing that experience from her pre-MP life into politics, into a political platform, right? And I think we must consider that when we consider this assassination. Okay, let's look at the killer then, or the alleged killer. So this is the guy who's supposed to have murdered her, Thomas Mair. Now, you need to forget everything that you've read about him in the media with regards to his character, because it really is all bullshit. I've been to Batley, and I stayed there for 3 days on one occasion, and I went there for another 2 days, and I met with 2 people who know him very well. And they told me he had no interest in right-wing politics or politics at all even. He was not political. His interests were in cats. He was a cat lover. He would walk miles to go and get food for other people's cats, and he built shelters for other people's cats. He was also a very keen gardener, so he'd spend his spare time doing other people's gardens. He was not interested in politics or far-right extremism as the mainstream media have painted him. Here's a comment that he made in his local media a few years before the murder. He states, he's talking about combating depression and mental illness. I can honestly say it has done me more good than all the psychotherapy and medication in the world. Many people who suffer from mental illness are socially isolated and disconnected from society. Feelings of worthlessness are also common, mainly caused by long-term unemployment. All these problems are alleviated by doing voluntary work. Getting out of the house and meeting new people is a good thing, but more important in my view is doing physically demanding and useful labour. This is what his 2 brothers said after it happened. His half-brother told The Guardian that Mair volunteered at a special school several times a week and had never expressed racist or even strong political views. Another brother said, I am struggling to believe what has happened. My brother is not violent and is not all that political. I don't even know who he votes for. He has a history of mental illness, but he has had help. So if his own brothers don't even know what his politics are, then we can conclude that what the mainstream media have said about him is bollocks. Right, let's go through the official story, and then I'll come on to the anomalies so we can try and work out what actually happened. So this is the library in Birstall where Jo Cox was going to attend her surgery meeting, her constituency surgery. So she arrives in a car up this street. This is Market Street. And she parks about there outside the library. She's with 2 other women in the car, her assistants. The 3 of them get out the car, and as Jo Cox gets out and starts to walk onto the pavement, a man wearing a baseball cap comes from the north end of Market Street down, and then he shoots her in the head. She falls to the ground in between 2 parked cars. So she falls in front of her own car and behind a maroon-coloured car. He then stabs her several times, and then he reloads his gun and shoots her again. During that period, someone tries to defend Jo Cox, an elderly gentleman. He gets stabbed. The perpetrator then is alleged he must have crossed the road at some point because the CCTV shows him fleeing south down Market Street, and he's alleged to have gone down this street, which is Union Street, up Huddersfield Road, up Brookroyd Lane, and then he's disappeared into a council estate. And he's not arrested until he's a further mile away, right? And they don't have visibility of him during that mile, right? We need to stress that. But I'll come on to his journey after he's committed the alleged offence in a moment. So that's what's supposed to have happened. Now, some people have asked the question, was Jo Cox even murdered? And the reasons why they've suggested this are several. And I'm just going to go through, so I'm going to deal with this question first before I go on to the anomalies. So reasons which have created doubt. Firstly, there's a lack of blood at the scene. So people have referred to images like this one. So this is the maroon car in front of Jo Cox's car. This is Jo Cox's car. So where she's died is in between. So there's no blood on the pavement. And the early reports did say that the attack was near the library or just outside the library. So the trial revealed that that wasn't the case. So it's interesting that the media got a completely wrong story up front, right? She's hardly left the car when she's been murdered, so she didn't get a chance to get on this path. So here's a helicopter shot of the maroon car and Jo Cox's car. That looks like blood to me. Okay, so I don't think we can say there's no blood. She was in the road for over an hour being held by another woman, yet no images of the body have been shown at the scene, which is unusual, but because this is a political assassination, I think it's possible that the mainstream media were denoticed about this, not to show any images of the body. And I don't think that the people at that library were perhaps the kind of people that would come out and start taking close-up photographs of a dying woman, right? And she was kind of screened by two parked cars. She was a fairly small woman. So I don't think it's surprising that there's no photographs of her while she was there. The jury were not shown any images of her body. Apparently they were shown a computer-generated image showing the points on her body where the injury were, which is very unusual. And I have sympathy with those who were saying, well, there's no body, there can't be a murder, right? But I think we also need to consider that maybe they're doing this in order to try and promote a false conspiracy. Lack of grief of the family. I commented on this at the time. Now, Jo Cox had worked all over the world, and she was very ambitious. She was a Cambridge graduate, and her sister was actually quoted as saying that Jo Cox had suffered from loneliness. So I think that Jo Cox, due to her sort of determined lifestyle, that she was such a career woman, that she may have been a little bit disconnected from her close family. So that might explain the lack of grief. Nick Colostrom has pointed out that he thinks the death certificate is fake. It might be, but at the end of the day, it's just a piece of paper. It's not evidence from the scene. It may be being used to create a false conspiracy. Now let's look at evidence which suggests that she was murdered. The BBC made a documentary, as they always do with these events, and all it did, as usual, was push the official story. So it didn't ask any questions, it didn't look at any anomalies, which is what they're supposed to do. Now in this documentary, there were 3 witnesses who witnessed the actual murder, or claim to have witnessed the murder. There were the 2 women in the car with Jo Cox, and a guy, David Honeybell, who was in the library. And he witnessed it, and he explains how he saw the gunman take a step back, reload his gun, and shoot her in the midriff. Now, if you watch these testimonies, they seem genuine to me. If they're all fabricating, then they've been to some damn good acting classes, right? I'm inclined to believe their testimonies. Now, we've also got the fact that there were multiple witnesses in addition to those 3 witnesses in court. So at least half a dozen who backed up their account. And I'm going to quote from Nick Colostrom here. I know he's in the audience. This comes from Nick, because Nick Colostrom was at the trial. He states, "We get a whole string of witnesses testifying to Jo Cox getting out of a car, being shot and stabbed in between 2 cars, so she falls onto the pavement, then rolls into the gutter of the road." So although I know that Nick is skeptical over whether there was a death, his statement there, I think, supports the fact there was a death. There's also CCTV on Market Street of whatever did happen. Okay, it's shot at a distance. I think a lot of people have missed this. I'm just going to go through it. So this post here is a CCTV camera post, and it's looking up Market Street. The clip I'm going to show you is the car arriving up Market Street, right? So, as usual, the police have shown a little bit and then left out the most important bit when they've released it. So we see here the time is 12:51. 12:51, her car arrives. It's then cut, and then a couple of minutes later, well, just under 3 minutes later, this is meant to be the perpetrator walking away after he's killed her outside the library. So I'll just play it a little bit. So he's wearing a white baseball cap, he's carrying a black holdall, supposedly with the gun in it, right? Now, one thing I didn't realize straight away is that you can actually see Jo Cox's car in this clip. That's it there. And in front of it is the maroon car. So we can zoom in on there and replay this video. Let me just play it again. So he's the perpetrator. So that's her car there. And you can see there's something going on in between the 2 cars. So I'm going to zoom in on that area and play it. Now, if you see the perpetrator alleged perpetrator. This is him here. So he actually turns around and looks at the car, and there's somebody in white or in light clothing. That's Cox's car, the car in front here. And you see commotion going on. So the perpetrator turns around and looks. Something's going on the ground. There's people gathered here. This car comes past, then someone runs across the road. There's someone hanging around here as well. I think that might be Darren Playford. I'm not sure, though. I'll come on to him. Someone runs across the road, and then someone runs up towards the library. So something's going on there. There's some real commotion going on at the place where they've said she's murdered. So I'm inclined to believe that she was murdered based on that evidence, although I do have some sympathy with those who were questioning it. So we come on to the question, was Thomas Mayer the actual killer? Please note, Thomas Mayer was not identified at the murder scene. So out of all those witnesses, nobody knew him. All they knew was a man with a baseball cap with a goatee beard. Note also that none of the CCTV images demonstrate that the man is Thomas Mayer. The two people I've met who know him well, by the way, so speak to him on a regular basis close up. I've showed them all of the images, the CCTV that the police have released, and they say that some of the CCTV is definitely not him. That's the CCTV in W.H. Smith's. And they say the rest of the CCTV, it might be him, but it could be easily somebody else. Right? So none of the CCTV images demonstrate that it's him, mainly because he's wearing this baseball cap, which is obscuring his face. Now at the trial, when the trial finished, I communicated with Nick Colostrom, and he was expressing doubt over whether the killer or whether the man in the dock was the real Thomas Mayer. Sounds quite profound, but apparently he just kept his head down, and he doesn't speak throughout the entire trial apart from once to confirm his name. And Nick was saying, well, I'm not convinced it's him. He didn't answer any questions, etc. Now, when I got to Birstall, this is the thing I wanted to resolve first off, the identity of the alleged killer. So I got all of these. These are all photographs of the real Thomas Mayer taken at different points in his life. So you'll see he's got quite a prominent mole on his right cheek. You see it in some of these images. He's got fairly prominent front teeth. So I showed these images to these two friends of his, and I also showed some of the official images from the trial. Now, after the trial, mainstream media, they put out this very close-up image of Thomas Mayer, which I thought was a bit odd. They wouldn't normally do that. And I was saying, well, is this a need to persuade? Do they need to persuade people that this was the killer? They also put these images out, right? So when I met these two people who know him, I showed them this image, and they both said, yep, that is Tommy Mayer. I then showed them these two images, and they said, yes, that is Tommy Mayer. I then showed them this image, which is the perpetrator being interviewed by the police in the BBC documentary, and they both said, that's not him. One of them said the eyebrows are far too thick. Now, in the BBC documentary, when they showed this image, they also showed this image shortly after it. And both these people who know him, they also said that's not Tommy Mayer. Now, to me, it just looks like the same person, because I don't know him, right? It looks similar enough to be the same person. But this is two people who know him very well as saying that that wasn't Tommy Mayer and that wasn't Tommy Mayer. So here's a close-up from that police interview, and I can't make out the mole on his right cheek in the interview. I'm going to show you a clip from it now.
You're here for two very serious offences. Murder and attempted murder. It's murder of an MP going about a business, and attempted murder of an elderly gentleman who comes to assist her. The MP's been shot and stabbed a number of times, and the elderly gentleman has been stabbed. That's why you've been arrested, and that's why you're being interviewed. And you're choosing to sit there and say nothing at all, which is your right. However, their families, they want to know what's gone on. Are you prepared to give them anything as to why. That's what we're thinking, why?
It's not uncommon for the police to sit in an interview room and listen to somebody saying no comment, but it is uncommon for us to sit and listen to somebody saying nothing, and he just simply didn't react to anything.
Think about that, folks, because if you're being interviewed by the police, right, and you don't want to answer a question, your brief will say, just say no comment, so you can move on to the next question. But he didn't even say no comment. What that means is his voice is not recorded on the police equipment. Now, why might he want to do that? Because if it's not the real Thomas Mair, he's going to have a totally different voice, isn't he? Right? So to me, that's a second piece of evidence which suggests that perhaps wasn't the real Tommy Mair, although I wouldn't be able to tell the difference, but I don't know the guy. Two people who know him say it wasn't him. So reasons why it's been suggested that a double may have been used, so not just in the police interview, at the trial as well. Firstly, the two people who knew him well say the man in the police interview is not Mair. During the police interview, the suspect did not speak at all. During the trial, the accused only spoke once to confirm his name. Now, you might be sitting thinking, no, he shouted out, "My name is death to traitors." That was at the magistrate's hearing. I'm not sure whether there was any public there, right? But at the trial, he just spoke very briefly to confirm his name, then kept his mouth shut, hiding those two front teeth. During the trial, no witness was asked to confirm the man they saw doing the murder was the man on trial. People at the trial were not sure it was the real Thomas Mair in the dock, and no defence was given by the accused. This is another key element which suggests he's a patsy. No defence was given. Now, you're going to see some facts that I'm going to present that his defence could have presented but didn't. So these all suggest that Nick Colostrom may have been right. So this is a comment from Dr. Nick Colostrom. No witness was asked whether the guy sitting in the dock was the Thomas Mair whom they remembered. The guy in the dock kept his eyes down, showed no interest in anything, just wrote notes and looked very bored. So think about this, folks. If it's true, let's go down this as a hypothesis. If they're using someone else, why would they do it? There's only one reason I can think of, and that's the real Thomas Mair didn't do the murder, and they're framing him as a patsy. They don't want the real Thomas Mair defending himself, saying, "It wasn't me, folks. I was doing someone's garden," right? So let's go down this avenue then, that we've possibly got an imposter. So we can repeat that Thomas Mair was not identified at the murder scene. No CCTV images can demonstrate whoever it was Thomas Mair. So there's no evidence from the murder scene that the killer was Thomas Mair. Let's look at the perpetrator's movements immediately after the murder, because I think the anomalies shed light on how this may have been done. So this was his path, right? This is the man in the white baseball cap is alleged to have fled down Union Street up Huddersfield Road and then disappeared into this housing estate. I'll come on to that in a second. I just want to point out a few more anomalies. Firstly, all the people who saw the murder claim the perpetrator was wearing a black baseball cap. But as we saw, the official perpetrator on CCTV is wearing a white one. There was a witness in the market, a young lad, I'm not sure if he gave evidence at the trial, he said the perpetrator fled north wearing a black baseball cap. So we've got conflicting accounts of the perpetrator with white and black baseball cap. Now, the official story states that when he got up onto Brookroyd Lane here, he went into John Nelson Close, jumped into a garden, removed his white baseball cap, and underneath was a black baseball cap. He threw his white baseball cap away, took his jacket off, and then continued on his journey up Brownhill Road, walks about a mile, and then is arrested some time later. Now, we know this path because of a witness called Darren Playford, which I'll come on to. Now, when I showed this to the two locals who I spoke to who knew Tommy Mair, one of them said, well, Tommy wouldn't walk round there to go down Union Street. There's a gap in the fence here. He would cut across there, or he might even go diagonally across the car park, right? So they were suggesting that that person didn't have local knowledge. He may have gone down this way, but that would mean that two witnesses would have been fabricating that said he went down Union Street, because there's no CCTV of him being released in that area. So that's his official path, right? And I'm very intrigued by this part of the story where he jumps into a garden, because he's in the garden for a period of time and we're not told how long he's in the garden for. I actually think he may have gone into this house and not the garden. So as I said, the witness who has enlightened us on this evidence is Darren Playford, because Darren Playford is alleged to have seen what happened, and he starts walking down Union Street to get away. So he rings the police and gives them a running commentary, right? And he follows the perpetrator through all these streets. So he flees the scene down this street, but the perpetrator starts to follow him. So he goes up this street, sees the perpetrator go up Brookroyd Lane, sees him going to John Nelson Close for a period of time, and then also sees him go up, this is Brownhill Road. Now, the timing of this is critical. So what I did was, I've made a little video where I've walked the same path as the perpetrator. So this is at the bottom of the Market Street, that's the CCTV camera there. So I'll put a clock here just to show you how long it takes. I've speeded up the camera. So he goes down this little side street here, he turns left onto Huddersfield Road, crosses the road, and then goes into John Nelson Street, or John Nelson Close, supposedly jumps into this garden, takes his hat off, comes out again, and then he comes to this T-junction, turns right, and then turns immediate left. This is Brownhill Road. So it took me just over 3 minutes to walk that, and I was just walking at a normal pace. So it would take certainly no more than 4 minutes to get up onto Brownhill Road. Right, so it's not going to take any more than 4 minutes to get from there to there. I'll show you a little clip from the actual phone call, because I've tried to get hold of this phone call from the police. You can't get hold of it. There's only very small segments of it being put out in mainstream media. Apparently it was played at the trial, but Nick has said that he thinks that it might have been an edited version at the trial. He's not sure. Right, but I'm going to show you the brief few clips that they have released in the media. And even this clip they've rearranged it.
If you hurry up, you'll get him.
Okay.
There's hell on this chaos. He stabs people and shot people. Right, I can see him again.
You can
It looks like
see
he's
him
taking his top
again.
off.
He's taking
Yes,
his top
right.
off.
He's got a black baseball cap.
It's a black
He's
baseball.
got the black carrier bag in his right hand. He's got a grey shirt on.
Yeah. And a
with
black
trousers.
A black trousers.
Yes. Now he's walking up Brownhill Road now.
And has got a black cap on.
A black baseball cap has changed it.
And
From a white one to a black one.
And he's walking up where, love?
Brownhill Road. If they get a police car at Brownhill Road, which is off Brookroyd Lane, you get a police car at the top of there and one at the bottom, you'll catch him.
Okay.
Right, now this article states how time stood still as cool 999 call handler helped police track down killer of MP Jo Cox. The 20-minute conversation which helped corner a killer. How can that conversation be 20 minutes? It takes 4 minutes to walk from there to there. It is suggesting that the man spent 16 minutes in this garden. Now, if he spent 16 minutes in that garden, surely the police would have been on the scene by then and arrested him. So my feeling is he may have gone into the house. I have discovered there's a Freemason connection with that house, right? So I think this may have been a safe house, right? I've also got a theory on Darren Playford. It's just a theory. I don't know this is a fact, but maybe he was some sort of controlled witness. So I felt it very important to speak to Darren Playford. So I found out where he lived. I then went to knock on his door. Stepson answers the door. He's not here. He's at work. So I then telephoned him. His van was actually parked on Market Street, right? So when I was at his house, he's got the phone number of his plumbing business on his van. So I rang him up. I said, I'm researching the Jo Cox case. Would you speak to me? All I want to know is what happened. What did you actually see? What really happened? Because he wasn't cross-examined in court because there was no defense put. They just played his phone call. And he said, no, I don't want to talk about it. Right, so he declined. So I waited a few weeks and then I wrote him a letter. And in the letter I asked him, well, could you just answer these few questions? I put a separate piece of paper in for him to answer the questions with a stamped addressed envelope. And I asked him, well, can you recall how long the phone call was? I mean, if it's still on his phone, he would still have it there. Can you recall how long the guy was in John Nelson Close? Critical piece of information. And also, what colour was the cap when you saw the guy doing the murder? So the day he got that letter from me, I get a visit from the police. This is my CCTV camera at my house, the copper, and I had to sign this piece of paper saying that I acknowledged that he's put a complaint in against me for harassment. And all I had done is phoned him once and wrote him a letter, right? And he's gone to the police, and I was warned by this copper, do not go and speak to him, otherwise you'll be in deep trouble, right? So, my opinion, that's an overreaction, right? So, suggests that I've hit a nerve asking questions about the timing of this. How long was he in the garden? Now, let's look at where the alleged perpetrator went after Brownhill Road. See, there's no way it can be 20 minutes because when the perpetrator is arrested, it's about a mile away, and it only takes 17 minutes to walk from there to the point where he's arrested. And Playford was not at that point. So it suggests that there's time passed in this journey, probably either at the house or in the garden. So the time to walk to the arrest scene, this is where he's arrested in this cul-de-sac here. It's called Ryesdale Avenue. So he's walked up Brownhill Road, along these roads in this housing estate, onto a main road, and he's just walked off the main road into a dead end here and been arrested. I'll come on to the arrest in a second. So it takes 17 minutes to walk from there to there. He left the murder scene at 12:53, as we saw on the CCTV. He was arrested at 13:35, so that's 42 minutes, right? It does not take 42 minutes to walk that distance. So this is lending weight to him being in John Nelson Close for quite a long period, maybe even longer than 16 minutes, perhaps 20 minutes at this point. Now, there is another piece of evidence on this corner. There's a CCTV camera from a domestic property. I'll just show you it. And he is seen walking past, right? And he actually walks around this corner. Now, there's no timestamp on that, so you can't tell where it's placed. I've shown this moving sequence, this CCTV sequence, to the two witnesses who know him, and they both said it could be him, but it could easily be somebody else. There's not enough detail there to identify him. And the house that this CCTV camera is at is the house of Paul Playford, who is Darren Playford's brother. So it's the brother of the man who complained against me for harassment. But it's probably just a coincidence. Right, so he then walks into Ryesdale Avenue. This is a cul-de-sac here. He walks in, and there's a cop car following him. The two police get out about here. They shout at him, he turns around, opens his arms out, and then they run at him and they rugby tackle him to the ground and they smash his head off the floor. And they then go back to the car and get first aid. They start bandaging him up. And then at that point, there's 3 armed response vehicles arrive with guys with guns and a couple of unmarked police cars as well. Now, this is filmed by someone who lives in this house here. And the guy who filmed it, I have interviewed him, and I have also interviewed his wife. They saw whoever it was with the grey shirt on walking into their street, and the wife commented to her husband, he's sitting watching the football. She said, oh, I've never seen him before, because it's a cul-de-sac, you see. She didn't understand why someone she didn't recognise was walking it. And then she says, oh, there's a police car following him. So the two of them started watching, and when the police took him to the ground, the guy starts filming on his mobile phone. Now, ITV bought the rights to that for £1,000 off them, and then it appeared on the 6 o'clock news, but they didn't show all of it. So I know what happened because I've interviewed this couple, and by the way, this couple did not give evidence at the trial. His defense team should have been all over this couple, right, who saw the arrest. Now, and I do suspect this is the real Tommy Mayer who was arrested. His mother is alleged to have seen this and commented that it was him. There's another reason why I think it was him, which I'll come on to in a second, right? So this is the police car that arrived first. There's a couple of unmarked cars coming in as well. Now, you would imagine that if this guy is the perpetrator who's just killed Jo Cox, that he would have the gun on him and the weapons on him. There would be forensic evidence to say he was the killer. At the trial, both the arresting officers testified that the man did not have a knife in his possession. One of them testified that he did not touch the firearm in the bag, but just felt it was there. So neither of these officers have seen a gun or seen a knife. The two witnesses who I've interviewed who watched them arresting him also say there were no guns or knives, or they didn't see any guns or knives. And the witness who filmed the arrest videos told me that he did not see knives or weapons, and the police put a tent over the bag. So the bag was there in the road. Sometime later, another unit came and they put a little tent over the bag. So this comes from Dr. Nick Collestrom's trial report. He says, a senior crime scene investigator arrived at the scene at 14:50. That's an hour and a quarter after the arrest. As he could not be present at the trial, his testimony was read out, together with videos shown. He saw a black baseball cap on the ground, plus a knife sheath and a dagger. In addition, there was a long gold-type object, which when unscrewed contained a knife. We were shown pictures. He found a black wallet on the ground with cards and cash. We were shown the name of Thomas Mayer on his library card. A Tesco's carrier bag was there, containing a pro-Brexit leaflet. We were shown 2 sets of keys also on the pavement next to the coins. The investigator took 118 photographs. The gun was partially visible, peeping out of the bag. So Nick then adds, at this point, I suggest the judge should have dismissed the case. The 2 police who arrested him clearly testified that Thomas Mayer had no knife. Then an hour later, a dagger appears on the scene of arrest. In fact, 2 of them, together with an absurdly large list of other clues. So we can say there is no evidence from the arrest that the man arrested was the killer, and we can say there is no evidence that the man arrested was the man on Market Street. Okay, now let's look at this arrest video then, because there's something very intriguing that I want to show you. So there's just the one cop car there at the moment. As I say, they've rugby tackled him to the ground and they're bandaging him up now. This is the car that they've jumped out of. I'll come on to the actual arrest sequence in a second. So the other vehicles start arriving, and one of the armed response guys, he actually came, and this is the bit I think they've cut out, he came up to the guy who was filming this with his mobile phone and told him to switch his phone off 3 times, and he's got a big gun, and the guy, to his credit, he said, no, I've got the right to film this. So someone gets out of this unmarked police car, and note he gets out the passenger side, right? He's the only person in civvy clothes. Here he is here. He's got out the passenger side of an unmarked car. So in other words, he's been chauffeured, right, to this scene for some reason, presumably by someone. Look at his hairline. So is this the man? Is this the impersonator? And have they brought him to the arrest scene in order to possibly switch him? Now, I showed this at Liverpool, and there was a guy who knows all about armed response policies and stuff, and he said, well, they're not behaving how they should. He reckoned that the 2 unarmed officers should have been moved away from the perpetrator, and the armed officers should have taken control. I don't know if that's true. But it's possible that these officers just think that they're taking part in an exercise, I would suggest, and that they've then been told to sign official secrets or whatever. You know, it's not the case necessarily that they all know what's going on. Now, since this lecture, I have been contacted by a police authorised firearms officer who served in firearms for 13 years. This is an extract from what he said. The clip involving the arrest of Thomas Mayer had me quite astonished, as it did not follow any firearms training that I am or have ever been aware of. In fact, it was like a training example of what not to do in that situation. The video clip clearly indicates that the suspect prior to arrest was potentially armed, and to make things more complicated, he did not have a firearm in plain sight. The weapon at the point of arrest had clearly not been identified or located. In addition to this, one must not, as an authorised firearms officer, assume a suspect has only one weapon on their person and deal with the suspect as a serious armed threat until thoroughly searched. The search should be carried out by armed officers only while the suspect is at gunpoint with at least one other armed officer. No unarmed officer should be anywhere near this situation, with their only role being to create a sterile area for armed officers to work within, keeping members of the public away from the scene. So who is that guy in the video, and why is he being chauffeured to the arrest location? Now, another fact which sheds light on the perpetrator being a patsy is that the police knew his name. They called out his name. When they got out of the car, they shouted the name of Tommy Mayer, and this has been redacted from the trial, right? How do I know this? Because I've interviewed the couple who saw him being arrested. So this is me talking to the couple who witnessed the arrest. When you first saw him and the police weren't there, how fast was he walking? Did he look? Where did you think he was headed?
I wasn't sure because it's a cul-de-sac, but he was just walking just a normal pace. He wasn't running or anything like that.
They got out of the car, they said his name first, so they obviously knew his name, and they just charged at him and took him straight down onto the floor, and that's where he went back and banged his head. Yeah, after they charged him and took him down, they said to him, "Have you just shot and stabbed? Somebody in Birstall?" Didn't reach for no weapons, just stood there with his bag in his hand, like, didn't even try run off or nothing, just stood and faced him like that.
Now, I didn't understand the importance of them knowing his name until I got back, so I've rang the guy again just to get him to confirm that. So he's on the phone here.
If you just tell me what you heard them say.
He says, "Are you Tommy Mayor? Have you just shot and stabbed somebody in Birstall?" And I couldn't hear what he was saying.
You couldn't hear what Tom Mayer replied. Okay, so
What police were saying, yeah, but I couldn't hear the word he was saying.
right. So you're fairly sure that he said his name.
They definitely knew his name. Honestly, they did.
Right.
100% they said his name.
Right.
I said to at least they know his name already when I come in. They did. 100% they said his name. They did.
So can you believe that the defence team haven't got those two as witnesses? Right? They didn't even mount a defence. So the police called out his name. Now, based on their statements and the police's statements, this is what I think happened. So they're following him for some period. I don't know how long for. He gets a bit spooked, so he comes off the main road and starts walking into a cul-de-sac. I don't think he knows it's a cul-de-sac. So the car pulls up and the police get out and they shout, "Are you Tommy Mayer?" He turns around and he says something like, "That's me." They then say, "Have you got any weapons? Put your bags down and show your hands." They then charge towards him and rugby tackle him to the ground. And once they've got him down, they say, "Have you just shot and stabbed someone in Birstall?" That's what I think happened. Now, these two police officers were interviewed on Good Morning Britain, Tweedledum and Tweedledee. And I'm going to show you a clip from this because it's very revealing.
We were about a few miles away with Craig.
Weren't we, Craig? Why does he need the authority of Craig?
And we was on the radio, and we decided we were sent into the area to have a look for the suspect, and we got told to proceed with caution because he was obviously armed still and he possibly had a gun and a knife on him.
So then you saw Thomas Mayer?
Yes.
Didn't you?
You didn't know at the time, though.
We didn't know.
Did you see that? So the journalist on the left's been briefed. He's been briefed that they do not know the perpetrator's name because he jumps in to save that question. Watch again.
So then you saw Thomas Mayer?
Yes.
Didn't you?
You didn't know at the time, though.
We didn't know. We thought it was him.
Right. Did you see the fade to white there? Right. They've actually cut 6 seconds out of this interview before they've posted it online. I know they've cut 6 seconds out because of the helpful little clock on breakfast telly. So here we go.
So then you saw Thomas Mayer?
Yes.
Didn't you?
You didn't know at the time, though.
We didn't know. We thought it was him.
Is the man who had just murdered Jo Cox.
Yeah.
So they're talking about the suspect and the identity of the suspect 6 seconds gone. I'd be interested to see the original interview for this.
What did you know about him at that stage?
Absolutely nothing other than he had a firearm potentially on him and a knife on him.
So you've turned the car around. Do you park the car? Do you stop the car in the street? Do you jump out?
No, we started following him.
Now it's interesting that they're following him, that they didn't just apprehend him immediately. We don't know how long for, and we don't know where from either.
He started walking down the cul-de-sac, and there were a couple of people in the gardens because it was around about 1 o'clock in the afternoon.
Now that suggests to me that the couple of people in the gardens is a problem to him. Otherwise, why mention it? And what he says next, I think, reveals what the problem is.
I put the window down and I sort of sat on the window ledge and I hung out the window. Craig held my belt.
All right, so what's going on there? He's sitting on the window ledge of a car, hanging out the window, with the other one holding his belt. What I think's going on there is he's got a taser in his hand, and he's thinking about tasering him because you do need to get within about 10 or 15 feet. Not easy to taser someone from a moving car. That would explain what he's just said there, right? And I think that might also explain why he's worried about people being in the gardens, because he doesn't want to do it in front of children, right? So, but he's not saying that in the interview. He's just saying that he's hanging out the window with Craig holding me belt. Isn't it funny?
And I remember Craig shouting to me, he's got something in his hand, he's got something in his hand.
He had a black hold all and Tesco carrier bag in his hand.
and I was shouting to him to stop. He just ignored me at the start, and then he turned around, and then Craig, he was still shouting, and then I just told him to put his bag down, show his hands, and he did. He threw his bag down.
He threw his bag down, didn't he then, yeah?
And he put his arms out to the side and went, "It's me."
Oh! He's missed a bit out, hasn't he? He's missed the bit out where he says, "Are you Tommy Mayer?" That's me. He's not saying, "It's me," admitting to the crime. He's replying to the question, "Are you Tommy Mayer?" These two guys, in my opinion, are perjurers for leaving this out of their court interview, that they were given his name beforehand.
I can't remember getting out the car. The next memory I've got is we're literally shoulder to shoulder with Craig, and we're running as fast as we could towards him, and then as we've come probably as far as we were to you, he's quickly moved his arms from outside, from his outstretched towards his belt and down, and
which is the worry where the firearm is.
We thought
We thought. He's not confirming it. He's saying we thought it was there.
Yeah, that's what we thought.
What did you do?
We rugby tackled him to the ground and got hold of his hands as quick as we could. And then you put some handcuffs on.
So, in my opinion, they've just rugby tackled an unarmed 53-year-old to the ground and smashed his head open, and then been given a bravery award for it. So how might it have been done? So based on my investigation, where I am at this point in time, this is what I think happened. It might change if new evidence comes along. So they've selected their Patsy Thomas Mayer weeks or even months before, and they've observed his behaviour patterns. They've predicted where he's going to be on a specific day or time and observe him on that day. They ensure that Jo Cox, the target, is brought near to that point at a particular time. A military hitman dressed as a patsy executes the murder. So someone with a similar stature, with a goatee beard and a cap. I'm not saying that the person who killed Jo Cox was the person being interviewed. Then the perpetrator flees the scene and receives information as to where the patsy is and just starts heading towards him, dressed in the same clothes, so that any CCTV or eyewitness evidence in between will match. When the perpetrator is near the patsy, the pasty is arrested and jailed. And then an impersonator takes part in the interview and trial. And we might ask, well, where's it gone wrong? Why did he wait for 16 minutes, if indeed he did, at that in John Nelson Close? Well, maybe he went in this house, which was a safe house, and he was waiting for a black baseball cap to be dropped off. Because I think it's possible that the real Thomas Mayer, when he went home, because he did go home, he changed his cap from a black one to a white one. So their operative had the wrong cap on. So maybe he had to wait until they got a cap to that house. Or it could be that they've lost observation on the real Thomas Mayer, or he's gone somewhere that's difficult, and he's been told to lie low for 20 minutes before he can continue on in their operation. So ensure that the target, Jo Cox, is brought to a particular point, i.e. the library, at a particular time. Now the person who brought Jo Cox to the library was Fazila Aswat. So was she involved, even unwittingly perhaps? Now she does seem very concerned with timing if you watch the BBC documentary. Just listen to what she says.
She was supposed to hit back into the office for 12 o'clock. But I knew Jo would never come at that time. She was always late, and obviously we had the surgery booked for 1 o'clock, so we ideally wanted to get to Bursell for about 9:45 to. She came into the office at 12, I think about 35. Said, "We don't have time for you to get a sandwich, but I've got a pasta bake for you in the fridge. Heat it up in the microwave and you can have it on the way."
You're not having a fucking sandwich, you're having a pasta bake. How long does it take to eat a sandwich? So she's very concerned. Is it just to get her there to the surgery for those really important constituents? or is there another reason? Now, in Brendan Cox's book, he talks about changes in security measures which happened just before the murder. Just listen to this. So he's talking about when Jo is dying in the road and Fazila is holding Jo in her arms as she's dying. Then suddenly Fazilla remembered that she and Jo had met the Chief Inspector of the West Yorkshire Police 3 weeks before. He had given both Fazilla and Jo his number and said, if you have any security issues, ring me straight away. She can't remember how she managed it, but still holding Jo, Fazilla rang the Chief Inspector. Now think about that. You've got a dying woman in your arms, or you're going to get your phone out and get the contacts out for this Chief Inspector, or you're going to ring 999 and get an ambulance. He might be on the golf course, right? And who is he? Is he part of the operation? And was he phoned in order to inform him that it had happened? So there's a lot of other details that need to be exposed in relation to this case. I mentioned the CCTV evidence. It's actually not that important because it doesn't identify Mayor. Nick Wallen, who was the detective in charge of the investigation, you Google his name, you'll find people saying that he's a corrupt officer. Brendan Cox, hope not hate. Nick Collerstrom will tell us about that. Mayor's legal team, etc., etc. So it's there waiting to be exposed, this case. So the motive for the Jo Cox murder, I don't think it's linked to Brexit. I know a lot of people do, and people have said, oh, he shouted out, what was it, Britain first. Well, he may or may not have. If he was an operative, right, whatever he's shouting out, you've got to consider that that's just putting a false motive in people's minds. So to me, it's irrelevant what he shouted out, right? If you look at Jo Cox's past and her connections, I think the motive lies there. It's interesting that the Clement Freud revelations came out the day before this murder, and Matthew Freud was involved in organising the Brendan Cox speech that he did in Trafalgar Square. So there may be a link to that. She's linked to Gordon Brown. Gordon Brown and Clement Freud were both involved with Madeleine McCann, were they not? Right? So we need to think a bit broader than just Brexit with this, right? I'm not even convinced that it did affect the Brexit outcome. Well, not outcome, but the swingometer. We've only got the companies who do those polls to rely on for that. It wouldn't change my vote. I mean, would it change? Would this change your Brexit vote? Anyone in this room? Wouldn't change mine. So I think that's a false motive.
Now, some people who are not aware of how state assassinations are run might be a bit puzzled. Firstly, when I say state, I don't mean Prime Minister or the Conservative Party. Political parties or even the Cabinet do not run all sections of the state. In particular, security services have zero day-to-day oversight by Parliament. They are a law unto themselves. If a security agency of the UK, such as MI5, deemed that Jo Cox was a threat to national security, probably because of something she knew, then it is possible that a state assassination was ordered without anyone in Parliament even knowing about it. Once the order has been approved and the wheels are set in motion to eliminate their target, careful consideration would be undertaken to determine what method is best for the hit. I hear some people saying, why wouldn't they just arrange something more simple, like an accident or a poisoning? All methods have their own problems and risks. In a supposedly democratic state like ours, it would be essential for the state to ensure that it is done without any suspicion of state involvement. Methods such as poisoning or even an accident of an MP is going to make people ask whether the state was involved. And any method that does not allow the case to be immediately solved, albeit fraudulently, means that a lengthy investigation has to be opened and will remain open until it is solved, which can create a headache, especially if everyone in the investigation is not part of the initial plot. In order to deflect blame away from the state, a false motive is useful and can be constructed such that it points to an individual rather than the state. If you choose a method where the perpetrator is clearly identified and there is a clear motive, albeit both being bogus, the case can be shut down and quickly forgotten about. If Cox had been assassinated in a more clandestine James Bond-style way without an obvious perpetrator being accused, then we'd have a nation of concerned public demanding the killer be found. By doing it the way they have enables them to quickly close down their bogus investigation and the case can be quickly put to bed. Now, if my hypothesis is correct, it means that Tommy Mayor's legal team would have been in league with the agency that ordered the assassination, along with the judge. Don't tell me you don't realise that we have corrupt lawyers and judges in this country. Remember that his legal team did not mount any defence, and I suspect his legal team knew fine well that their client was not the real Tommy Mayor. Bear in mind also that once approval is given by, let's say, MI5 for this assassination on grounds of national security, in their eyes it then becomes perfectly legal to kill her and frame someone else for the murder. I suspect that at least 2 senior police officers were fully aware of the scope of this plot, but have carried it out in such a way that as few officers as possible beneath them know how it was done. It is likely, in my opinion, that the senior investigating officer was working for the team running the assassination. I just want to expand on the debate about a possible motive. If some group wanted Jo Cox killed, it would be most likely because of information that she knew about. If you are going to manufacture a motive, then you need to create one that people will believe. She was very pro-immigration and supported people from other countries who wanted to settle in the UK. So the most obvious enemy to her would be a far-right extremist who was against immigration. This is the narrative the mainstream media sold us, which was a completely false narrative and a completely false motive. Consider the fact that the perpetrator is alleged to have shouted out "Britain first" before pulling the trigger. There is some controversy over whether this was shouted out, but I would like to point out 2 things here. First, if it was shouted out, it was not shouted out by Tommy Mayor, but by an operative, whose role was to dispatch of Jo Cox. Therefore, whatever was shouted out would have been done to plant a false motive in the public mindset. It would have been done to get people to buy into the false premise that this murder was about an argument over immigration. Second, the fact that there is controversy over whether he said it, I suspect is no accident, because it means that people will discuss it more, and the false motive is then reinforced by the fact there is controversy over whether it was shouted or not. This argument is totally irrelevant in trying to establish the real motive. I strongly suspect that the motive was to do with what Jo Cox knew, which the state could not risk being publicly known about. Did she know something about Gordon Brown or Clement Freud? It is alleged that Tommy Mayor was getting far-right literature that somebody had been subscribing him to, then it being sent to his house. He sent the material back unopened. It is likely this was done in order to manufacture evidence to suggest he was interested in far-right ideology. This was happening some time before the murder, so I suspect the assassination was planned perhaps some weeks before it happened. Finally, what I'd like you to consider is, if I am correct, what it must have been like for the real Tommy Mayor. A 53-year-old man who likes gardening and caring for cats is walking down a street minding his own business. He has no knowledge of what has just happened outside the library 40 minutes earlier. A police car starts following him and he is not sure why, so he diverts his route off the main road and walks down a random street. The 2 officers get out of their car and shout at him, and then pull him to the ground, splitting his head open. They then arrest him on suspicion of murder and he is put in a police cell. He is not given legal advice, and 6 months later, after not being given a trial, he is sent to Franklin Prison as a Category A prisoner for life. Please do me a favour and ensure your MP watches this video.
Order. Colleagues, today the 2 extremely brave police officers who apprehended the killer of our late friend and colleague Jo Cox are in the side gallery for Prime Minister's questions. I am referring to PC Jonathan Wright and PC Craig Nichols, both of the West Yorkshire Police. Gentlemen, we honour your public service, we thank you for it, and we offer you the warmest of welcomes here to the House of Commons today.